G'day guys and gal. I often talk pretty poorly about the Traitor Primarchs' decision to abandon their father's dream and then turn the galaxy to shit on the crux of a true golden age. But then again, as the readers of the lore, we get to see the bigger picture and all the contexts of all the situations. These Traitor Primarchs often only get to see it very narrowly, with many of them not having seen their distant father for decades. So that did make me wonder, did any of the Traitor Primarchs have a genuinely valid point and reason for going traitor initially? Would a reasonable person in their shoes have potentially done the same thing? I'll be playing some devil's advocate today, as well as trying to be as sympathetic as possible to their reasoning, and if despite that, their decision still looks stupid, then I suppose that answers that. Before we get started, we're trying something new and exciting for Major Minis today. I have partnered up with the 3D art guy, easy to remember name, to offer you guys and gal the Big Magical Giant, as well as his Space Egyptian Honor Guard, available for sale right now. The Big Magical Giant himself is obscenely detailed. I'm talking like a Big E level of detail, whilst also featuring multiple head variants, weapon variants, and even loadout variants. Do you want him to throw a fireball? Do you want his staff to be that of the sun or the moon? He's very modular, so you can really customize him however you want. The Honor Guard are also similarly modular, multiple head variants, weapon variants, and so on. The Honor Guard are quite large, as they are super soldiers in mech suits as opposed to warriors in power armor, so they really stand out on the battlefield. The Big Magical Giant comes in 32mm tabletop scale for all your wargaming needs, 75mm art scale if you want the details to be a bit bigger and easier to paint, as well as 112 scale for the sickos of you that like a challenge and really want to go berserk. I will warn you that the Big Magical Giant is a very detailed, complicated model, so if you have never bought a model before, then this is probably not the one to start with, but you do you, I'm not your dad. Stock is super limited. We offered our VIP customers early access and we've already sold half, so I wouldn't be surprised if by tomorrow this is all sold out. For a bit more context on how this partnership with 3D Guy works and how it will work going forward, he modeled these guys and you can actually get the STL for the Big Magical Giant right now if you go to his Patreon, which also features many other highly detailed STLs. I'm not going to try and pretend I'm the only way to get it, I'm not. However, it is a very complex, detailed model to print. It took us multiple test prints of each scale before we're happy with the final print, supports, and result. So unless you're an experienced printer, it'll probably be easier to get the physical product from us, but once again, I'm not your dad. The goal is that every few months, I will choose some models from 3D Art Guy's catalog, scale them perfectly, perfect the supports, and then offer super limited drops of them to you guys and gal, and so far it's awesome to see how well it's going. Link is below. I'd say you have roughly 12 to 24 hours from now if you're interested. Today I'll go over each of the Traitor Primarchs' fall and their reasoning before discussing if it was actually justified or not. Let's get into it. While I do despise Fulgrim the most out of all the traitors, especially since his fall seemed to be super stupid, picking up a penis-shaped sword and then bam, traitor, there was actually more to it than that when I dived in deeper. Fulgrim was massively insecure about the fact that his legion was tiny when he inherited it due to some unfortunate mishaps and Trazyn stealing a bunch of their gene seed. His list of his legion's victories was tiny compared to that of his brothers, even though the Emperor's children held a lot of honor for what they had done. This led to Fulgrim being a bit of a douche even before he came in contact with the Layer Blade, engaging in wars that were unnecessary or overly violent and convoluted because he had to make a point. So for Fulgrim, the Layer Blade was the small push he needed to become a traitor, not the entire cause. His fall was completely unjustifiable, especially with how fucked and debaucherous his legion became, but is it understandable? Fulgrim was both extremely vain and arrogant, whilst also simultaneously being insecure and self-doubting, a vicious combo that borderlines on narcissism. His noble aspect and brotherhood with Ferris kept this all in check until the Layer Blade suppressed his nobility and allowed his darker aspect to take control. The Layer Blade literally would not have worked on any other Primarch to bring them low, so while Fulgrim's fall wasn't justified, it also wasn't necessarily stupid or badly written. A chink in his armor was exploited, which nudged them over to the dark side. Perturabo's fall was tragic since he seemed to be the only traitor that even by the siege still had a sense of nobility and honor. During the Horus heresy, Perty wanted to fight the war cleanly. He didn't want to use demons or sorcery. He actually planned on forcing his father and loyalist brothers to surrender through show of force and were going to spare them. There were multiple instances of him treating his enemies with honor and respect. The dude literally ditched the Siege of Terror halfway through because his traitor brothers were being such disgusting fuckheads. So why did he fall in the first place? Well, Perty was also the king of resentment and not communicating well. The Emperor designated Perty as his Lord of Iron, his unbreakable son, and with Perty's legion being great at sieges, easily the most vicious form of warfare, Perturabo was sent to the absolute worst war zones, his legion suffering massive casualties. Perty never complained or refused these war zones, however he grew to resent them, especially since his brothers like Rogel seemed to be getting much more praise and glory for significantly easier battles. This resentment and anger finally exploded when he discovered his own homeworld had revolted against the Imperium, and to vent his embarrassment, he went way overboard in its subjugation and destruction. He was horrified at what he had done and believed the Emperor would punish him. However, when Horus came to him instead, he told him that he was right to crush Olympia, and that he was useful and important. He gave Purdy the praise and glory that the Emperor never did, while also basically saying that the Emperor would never forgive him, but Horus would if Purdy stood by his side as a brother. It's pretty similar to Fulgrim's fall in regards to a chink in the armor being exploited. If Horus tried to give Purdy the layer blade, Purdy would have told him to shove it up his ass, but give Purdy some love and appreciation and he'll become your ride or die. However, yes, this was more so on Purdy refusing to communicate or express his desires to the Emperor, allowing the resentment to fester instead of actually dealing with it. Purdy had created a cage around himself that only he could see. To be honest, the Emperor probably wouldn't have given a fuck about Purdy smashing Olympia. The Primarchs did shit like that all the time, but Purdy had a very warped sense of reality, where everyone was against him, that he had convinced himself that betrayal was his only option. Conrad Curse was never exactly the most reliable of the Primarchs. When the heresy broke out, the Night Lords were actually already on the run and were actively being hunted by the other legions to bring them to heel for their atrocities, as well as Conrad attacking and nearly killing Rogel Dawn. See, Curse was going insane and had begun foreseeing the heresy, which drove him even crazier, especially when he foresaw that his legion was going to be on the traitor side. As Conrad convinced himself that all his visions would inevitably occur, he believed he didn't have a choice in the matter, so he joined up with Horus. It also didn't help that Conrad was sadistic and his legion was full of genuinely evil people who wanted to become traitors. For Conrad, his decision was entirely justified as it wasn't a decision at all. However, as we know, futures are never set in stone in Warhammer, no matter what the visions show. Hence, Conrad was fundamentally wrong, but that never mattered to him. The only one that was more obvious to become a traitor than Conrad was Angron. Angron hated the shit out of the Emperor from day one due to the Emperor taking Angron away from his final battle and leaving his men and women to die, something Angron never got over. Angron also saw the Emperor as a high rider, an enslaving tyrant who used those under him to further his own agenda, literally the exact thing Angron despised the most. Angron literally said that even if the heresy didn't happen, he still would have opposed the Emperor before the end, and even fought against the Space Wolves prior to the heresy when the Wolves came to bring the World Eaters to heel. For once, I actually respect Angron's decision here. The Emperor fucked him over hard, and due to Angron having his terminal brain problems due to the Butcher's nails, the Emperor saw him as a limited, broken tool, so he didn't give a fuck about making amends or being good to Angron. He just wanted to milk Angron for everything he was worth before his brain melted. The only one whose resentment could have matched Perturabo's was Mortarian's. However, Morty's resentment was entirely misplaced, hating the Emperor for saving his life and proving him wrong, unable to take responsibility and reflect, which sums up Mortarian pretty perfectly, and also explains how he went from such a steadfast, staunch anti-psyker to a giant smelly moth wizard demon. Mortarian's fall actually confused me the most, as well as the Emperor apparently, as Morty was never meant to fall, all simulations of the heresy showing him remaining loyal. He actually resented the shit out of Chaos at the start and his traitor allies. He tried to recruit Jagadai to the traitor's cause, mostly because he wanted to have a brother to back him up against all the traitorous sorcerers he was surrounded by. But Morty's greatest flaw is that he can never be wrong, even when he is. So even after he realized he fucked up, his cook brain couldn't accept that, so he had to engage in the most hypocritical mental gymnastics to justify everything. Dude even started using his suppressed psychic powers, and instead of being cautious or ashamed of it, he was like, fuck it, I'm different, I know better. Morty's fall was by far the most embarrassing and pathetic. At least most of his traitorous brothers owned it. Morty has spent the last 10,000 years trying to justify every decision he has ever made. Funnily enough, despite probably having one of the best reasons for turning against the Emperor, Magnus took the longest amount of time and put the most amount of thought into his decision, with only Jagadai Khan coming close. This is because Magnus, prior to the fall of Prospero, was hyper loyal. Horus didn't even consider trying to turn him. The idea of the Wolves versus Magnus was to wipe out both the Thousand Sons and the Space Wolves in one go, the two most powerful loyalist legions. It was just a happy accident that it ended with Magnus on Team Traitor, at least for Horus. I think Tzeentch had this one all planned out. Magnus actually played both sides during the heresy. His noble shard joining the loyalists, another shard saving Vulcan and helping to get him resurrected. He also allowed Nakonai Sharikan to survive the heresy to ensure that the Primaris Marines would get created. But then the other half of him was angry and wanted justice. Magnus actually came to the Emperor and was offered a new legion if he rejoined the loyalist side, as the Thousand Sons were too far gone by this point. Magnus rejected the offer, cementing his fate as a traitor. Another version of this event is that Magnus pleaded for forgiveness before the Emperor and the Emperor told him to get fucked, but I'm leaning towards the first version being the true one. Either way, the fall of Magnus was by far the most detailed and came down to a heartbreaking decision: let his sons die for his father or kill his father to save his sons. The fall of Prospero didn't actually play as much of a role in this decision as you would have initially thought. With all that said though, Magnus was the archetype architect of his own suffering and could have made many decisions prior to prevent having to make that big one. Now for the big betrayal, the fall of Horus that kicked off the heresy. A lot of people criticize the fall of Horus for being so rushed, going from an absolute awesome bloke, loyal and steadfast with a few subtle character flaws, to full on jihad fuck everyone I'm evil mode over the course of a coma. Basically, the fall of Horus went like this. He had a few insecurities and a hidden but monstrous ego. He was stabbed with a chaos knife that poisoned him and was killing him. He became very melancholic and expressed his insecurities, regrets and resentments. He was then taken to a chaos temple and put into a coma to be shown visions. Erebus entered the coma under a hidden guise to show Horus visions that were out of context, visions like a world dedicated purely to the worship of the Emperor as a god without a statue of Horus being there, using those visions to feed lies to Horus. Magnus attempts to intervene to save Horus's soul, but Horus just eats up the lies from Erebus and agrees to become the arch traitor, kicking off the heresy. Unfortunately, this fall just doesn't do it for me. Unlike Morty or Fulgrim, Horus's character flaws were pretty subtle and should have not been so easily exploited. Loyal Horus and Traitor Horus just feel like two entirely separate characters. Lorgar had a similar mindset to Conrad in terms of life being black and white. Lorgar was desperate to have a god to worship. First it was the Chaos Gods, then it was the Emperor, then it was back to Chaos. There was no atheism option for Lorgar. So when the Emperor punished him on Monarchia and forced him to stop worshipping him, Lorgar simply had to find a new god. Lorgar wasn't happy that the new god was Chaos, but it didn't matter to him. If the Chaos Gods were God, then it wasn't up to him. He had to worship them. The first line of his Book of Lorgar basically says, "Sorry fam about burning the galaxy, but bitches gotta pray." Not quite word for word, but you know what I mean. While I personally wouldn't fall to Chaos for the same reasons as Lorgar, his fall was consistent with his character, so in that respect I can appreciate it. And finally, Alpharis and Omegon. Even when he went traitor, Alpharis still saw himself as a loyalist. This is because he turned because of a vision he was shown by a group of aliens called the Cabal. The vision showed that if Horus was allowed to achieve a decisive victory, then the subsequent aftermath would cause a traitor civil war that would drive humanity to extinction, overloading and then starving the Chaos Gods, causing them to wither, thus allowing a now empty galaxy, free of chaos, to be repopulated by aliens. A true defeat of chaos. Alpharis believed, in his arrogance, that this is what the Emperor would have wanted, hence the Alpha Legion went traitor. Omegon wasn't as convinced and eventually decided to oppose his twin brother, causing the Cabal vision to become invalid and a Horus victory to then spell doom for all, so they had to prevent it. So technically, Alpharis didn't go traitor, at least he likes to think he didn't, but he definitely fucking did. And while it seems justified because he thought he was doing the Emperor's will, why would you trust a bunch of aliens over the Emperor himself? Pretty sure if the Biggie wanted Horus to win, there was other shit he would have done to ensure that would happen. Overall, it's just very hard to justify betraying your creator at the zenith of your empire just as you're about to enter a golden age, especially when your creator has given you infinite resources and free will to pursue humanity's dream of peace and domination. So even the most interesting and understandable betrayals still make those Primarchs look weak and stupid. It just depends on if it creates fun, interesting lore, like with Magnus, or we just try not to think about it too hard, like with Horus and Mortarion. Except for Angron, of course. I actually back him going traitor. If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, then pick up the Big Magical Giant. At this rate, I'm expecting the 32 and even the 75mm scale to be sold in the next 12 hours or so, with the 112 lasting a little bit longer and the Honor Guard lasting a little bit longer after that. Hit the subscribe button and hit the real subscribe button for more traitorous content. Join the Discord for more memes and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.